Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. In the final interview of Season 2, you're going to hear from Shawn Oates. Shawn is a Christ follower, founder of Leaf, which is an app that helps you make group plans, co-host of a podcast called Two Black Sheep, and creative director at Allen & Aid. You can follow Shawn on Instagram at @soates or at 2blacksheeplive. Leaf is available on the App Store. Click the link in the episode description to check it out and download. Shawn and I had a great conversation about his podcast, his experience growing up in a predominantly white community, the struggle to settle into his identity, and the power of having a consistent group of friends in good times and also in the midst of struggle and grief. I can't think of a better conversation to close out the Season 2 interviews and this series on relationships. So here we go. Hi, Shawn. Welcome to the Unsuitable podcast. Thank you for being here.
It's great. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Good. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not unfamiliar with the podcasting world yourself because you have a podcast. You co-host a podcast called Two Black Sheep.
Correct.
With our mutual friend Greg.
Correct. And I am one of the black sheep.
You are one of the two
Sheepuses.
black sheep. I think it's just sheep.
It's just sheep?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think so.
I'm still learning the English language.
It's hard. It's a hard language.
It's tough.
So can you tell me a little bit about Two Black Sheep and how you decided to start it and why and who it's for and all that jazz?
Definitely. Well, I would love to say that it was my brilliant idea to start a podcast, but it was not.
No?
It was something that Greg had wanted to start for some time now, and I was always like, nah. I mean, you can do it by yourself, and I would cheer you on from the sideline, but I didn't want to be a part of it.
Right.
But eventually he twisted my arm, and we decided to start Two Black Sheep. And essentially what it is we were having so many conversations wherever we would go as friends, talking about topics like, should I tip at 7-Eleven to, the weird environment of dating online and things like that. So we were having all of these discussions, and then we would go to these restaurants or bars, and we would have the same discussions, and people would join into those discussions and provide a different perspective that we had not originally brought to the table. And so we were like, why don't we just put this in audio form and distribute it out to the world, and invite them to be a part of the discussion. So that's what it is. It's a weekly podcast where we get on. We just have a great time talking about different topics that are plaguing our mind. And then we use our Instagram page to invite others into the discussion, and so they can provide their feedback and say, you guys are terrible, or we do not agree with you guys. I don't know what you're talking about. That word you used was not correct. So, so it's been great. It's been great for my confidence.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah. So I guess my podcast is maybe not popular enough to have that many trolls so far. People being you're the worst. Yeah. Please stop existing. Yeah.
we call them fans.
Fans?
They're blowing hot air, so we call them fans.
Oh, I see. I like that.
We love it. We love it. And that's part of the reason we started it, because we know that people do have a different perspective than us 30-year-old dudes, single dudes. We want to open that up to have that conversation. So
that's really cool. And you talk about some very serious topics as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you always bring your personality and a little bit of levity to it, but you also share some really real experiences, which I appreciate.
So the balance. You're one of our fans.
But not one that blows hot air. I think I really actually like what you do.
Oh, cool. So you're a true fan.
I think so. Nice. I don't know. I left a review. So.
Oh, yeah. You're super fan. So at that point.
But so in the podcast, you've talked a lot about growing up in Arkansas. Would you mind sharing about that experience here?
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this, bad perception about Arkansas. Arkansas is a great place. Either people will say, Arkansas? Where in New Jersey is that? Or they'll be like, oh, I've been to Arkansas. Little Rock? Is that a city in Arkansas? It is. But there's so much I guess a lot of things that people don't know about Arkansas, and it's a great place to grow up. So yeah, I grew up in Arkansas. I was the son of an assistant pastor. You can imagine being in the Bible Belt. Everyone goes to church on Sunday. And my mom was the choir director. We had a very small Pentecostal church that I grew up in. And yeah, we grew up in a town with about 20,000 people. And people will say, well, that is not a lot of people, especially when you compare it to New York City. But that town called Russellville was a big town. It had a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
I mean, it had a Tyson plant.
Yeah.
It had everything you need in a town. A Walmart.
Yeah.
And so growing up in that town, which was predominantly white, it was a place for our middle class family to sort of feel at home. So being in this small town, yet big town,
Right.
Being able to experience the things that we experienced. So yeah, I do not take my upbringing in Arkansas for granted. I do miss Arkansas a little bit.
Yeah, there's something really cool. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina, which is also the South. My town had 5,000 people in it, so it was a truly small town.
Yeah.
And I didn't even grow up in the town. I grew up on a farm outside of the town, in a suburb of the town, if you will. But there's like a lot to be said for growing up in a semi-rural area of the South. I mean, the food's amazing for one thing.
Definitely.
Like, you can't get, well, you probably can, but it's hard to find like really good grits, like really good cheese grits up here, and like chicken and waffles and like collard greens and all of that.
I miss those.
Oh my gosh.
And then fried Oreos.
Yes. All of the like state fair food as well. That's just like fried butter and fried everything.
Everything's fried.
Terrible. Yeah. So you grew up in that town. What was your experience like in school and through that process?
Interesting. I started off at a private school, and when I describe it, people will say that is not a private school; that is homeschool. It was a school of about 10 students, and 2 of them were my siblings, and my mother was one of the teachers, and there was only 2 teachers. Yeah, I grew up in a school like that was put on by my church. So it was just basically the kids of the parents that went to the church that were members of the congregation. So that was my kindergarten, first grade, and second grade years growing up and learning in that environment where if one person in the class got in trouble, the entire class was getting a paddling. So corporal punishment was alive and well. And then, since your mother was a teacher, you would also get a paddling at home, even for something that you did not do. So
great.
Yeah, so that was my upbringing. And then in 3rd grade, we started to go to public school. My mom actually left the school, so we no longer got free tuition, so she was no longer working at the school. And we started to go to public school. And that's where I started to notice there was a difference between me and the other kids. My mom used to dress me up in sweater vests, sweater vests and khakis. Yeah. Whether it was summer or winter, I was in sweater vests and khakis. Yeah. And I would go to school. I remember being in 3rd grade, and everyone was like, "Why are you dressed like that?" And I'm outside on the playground, playing in these khaki khaki pants and unable to run. I was not as fast as the other kids, and so it was terrible. But it was great because we built sort of this, I guess, aura about the Oates kids. Because I had 2 siblings, one being a twin sister, so we were the same age. And then I had an older sister. She was only a 1 year older. So she was in 4th grade and we were in 3rd grade. And so we sort of walked around like, oh, those are the Oates kids. And growing up in a town that's predominantly white, and you are these 3 black kids, and you are making good grades. You're walking around dressed like you're going to a formal ball, right? And you're well behaved because you're used to getting paddlings at school. We started to stand out. And then I started to stand out even more when obviously growing up in a private school where the education is oftentimes better. I was probably a year or 2 ahead of the most kids in the class. And so I was placed in these gifted and talented programs. And so there were more kids there who didn't necessarily look like me at all. It was just even a smaller group of people. And for me, I was just like starting to think of like, why is there no one that looks like me or has the same skin color as me in these types of classes? Like what's going on here? So, and the only people that I started to see were my sisters, right? In terms of like people that look like me, it's like my family. Where's everyone else outside my family that has the same shade? So yeah. And then, going into fifth grade and sixth and seventh grade, middle school, I started to get involved in sports.
Yeah.
And I was not athletic at all. Like I couldn't catch a ball if if I exerted all my effort, if I had to catch a ball to win $1 million or to save a life, I would drop that football. And all the kids had played football earlier in their life. When I was in private school, they were playing little pee-wee football, and I was not doing that. So I started playing sports around 6th and 7th grade, and this is funny, but now looking back at it, but it wasn't funny at the time where they ran out of football helmets, large size football helmets.
Right.
So I had to wear a high school helmet.
Oh,
and as you can imagine, as a 7th grader, wearing not only a huge helmet, but a different color helmet than our team colors.
Oh my gosh.
And so I stood out, even though I was on the bench most of the time. But when I got in the game, they were like, who is this kid? Does this kid play for a high school and he's now playing for 7th grade? So me standing out, even in 7th grade, and then moving into 8th grade, getting involved in basketball, where I was terrible at basketball. I couldn't shoot. I shot with 2 hands, and I just chunked the ball at the rim, and it would never go in. And there was no reason for me to make the team. But because my dad knew the coach, I made the team. And in order for me to make the team, 20 people had to make the team. So I was number 20. So he couldn't just accept me on a team for where the team should have been like 12 to 15 people. He couldn't just have me on the team knowing that there were plenty of people better than me. So he had to take all 20 of us onto the team. Pretty much everyone that tried out on the team.
Oh my gosh. Just so you could be on the team he could do your dad a favor.
Everyone knew it, right? So I sat at the end of the bench. There was not enough chairs for the bench, so I had to bring my own chair to sit down.
No, that's not true.
That's definitely true.
What?
But it was definitely a season where I just sat and watched. And then, growing up in a town where you're black, and a lot of people base their idea of what it means to be black on the rappers they see on TV or the athletes they may see. So they expect you, especially in this town, to be good at sports. They expect you to excel in sports. And the other black kids that I saw playing sports, they were really good. And so everyone expected you to be good. And and so around 7th and 8th grade, I started to get this name calling started to come out. So people would say things like Oreo. And we even have an episode about that on our podcast.
It's really good.
About us. They were calling us Oreos because we were black on the outside, but on the inside, they considered us white. And they would say it as more of like a derogatory thing, or they would say it in a way of like being white is good in terms of it's better than being black. And so it was difficult for me to understand, like, okay, are they trying to be my friends or are they just making jokes? Like, what does this all mean? And even at the time, I didn't necessarily understand what it all meant. And I didn't understand that it was racist, or it's just something I grew up and I was used to hearing. Outside of like, oh, he has a big head jokes. There are things, the whole point of, oh, he's not really black, started to come out. And then going to high school, I felt like I needed to create this persona. I needed to create an identity in order to be accepted by one of the groups, whether it was black people or whether it was white people. I wanted to feel accepted. So the black kids thought, okay, he's not black enough to be a part of us. He's not. He makes he's in all these gifted and talented classes. He's, sort of separating himself from us black kids. He doesn't necessarily live in the neighborhoods that we live in. And then the white kids are like, well, his skin color, he's black. Yeah, he is in our classes. He's not the best athlete we've seen, and as a white kid, we're used to that. But he's black, so we can't be a part of our group. So in high school, I was sort of this lone ranger trying to figure out where I belong. I remember being in the cafeteria. And so we have pretty much, so most of our school was white, and then we had one table that was just all the black kids sat. And I remember walking into the cafeteria trying to figure out which table should I sit at.
Yeah.
Should I sit at one of the 35 other tables where it's just white kids, or should I sit at this one table where there's just black kids? And for me, it was just weird that was a question that would be in my head of which table to sit at. This is not 1960s where there's segregation. It's more of like the segregation in my head that I was making. But I find myself at the black table, and it would pretty much be a lunch hour of them sort of making fun of me, and not necessarily in like this mean, derogatory way, but they were doing it in a way to like poke fun or make jokes about sort of me being a little bit different. So I just started to build this like pedestal persona about myself, and I started to create who I wanted Shawn to become. And it became easier the later I advanced in my high school, my time in high school, where I started to get attention from ladies. And so for me, I had all these girls getting attention from different girls, from girls who were not necessarily going to our school. And so I could sort of practice. I became an actor where I could practice being one person with one girl, and then I can be another person with someone else. And for me, that was a way where I was able to feel accepted. I felt loved, and like someone cared about me, and I can have friends, and things like that. And sort of, and that in turn built up this confidence, where I felt now I can sort of take on any type of group, where I can go to the white section and feel accepted there. I can go to the black section and feel accepted there. But it was this sort of false confidence that I was building.
Right, because it was based off of a person you were pretending to be versus like who you actually were. And feeling like you needed to accommodate and alter certain parts of yourself depending on which group you were trying to be accepted by.
Right.
And I think that's like what you're describing. I grew up in a very predominantly white town as well. Obviously having a different experience as a white person in that space. But there's definitely this sense culturally that like whiteness and white culture is the standard, and everything else needs to be adjusted to fit that.
Right.
And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, is this like forging an identity in spite of that like kind of pull for, assimilation, for lack of a better word.
Right. But it's something I didn't realize until later in life. So I remember being in high school, and on senior prank day, there was a kid who was odd, but he created this duct tape person, like a mannequin, out of duct tape. And he took some rope and tied a noose around this mannequin and hung it up in front of on a tree in front of our school. And it said, "This N-word did not get away." And for me, that sent shockwaves through our school that, okay, there's a problem with race at this school.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when kids say things like, "Oh, you're acting white," or when you speak with intellect, or you don't talk with slang, they say, the black community will say, "Oh, you're acting white," or "You're selling out," which which in term is racism, as you're saying, because they're saying white is perfection, and if you're black and you're meeting this mark of perfection, in order for me to feel better, I need to sort of demean you and say you're being a sellout. And then on the other side of that is like the white people sometimes will accept you only because you talk. You talk that way,
Right.
or you sound, like you're intelligent, or you don't dress what they view black people dress like. And so you're sort of caught in this in-between land, trying to figure out, okay, like, who am I?
Yeah.
And then who is willing to accept me and who, based on who I am. So,
Yeah, you said a lot that was like really compelling, I think, and poignant. The experience of growing up in the South where, there's a presumption that, I don't know, for me at least, being on my side of it, was like, oh, racism is not really a problem anymore. It's not like, it's maybe with like some people, with certain, like the person who did the senior prank, like maybe those people, but, like thinking back over it, and before I moved to New York, before I like got out of that kind of bubble experience, thinking like I probably had some of those kinds of thoughts, or maybe I even like offhandedly made some of those types of comments. And so it's like that, like being like putting yourself in a position where you're able to recognize the faults in like your experience or your thought patterns, has been a huge part of my process with like moving to New York and having experiences with different types of people from different cultures that says, no, like your experience is not the standard. It's not the primary thing. The things that are important to you are not the ultimate thing that people need to be adjusting to. Like other cultures, other experiences have so much value and so much to offer, that we really miss out when we kind of try to, when we're not comfortable with things that are different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we even talked about sort of keeping a diverse group of people around you. Like you said, coming into New York, where it's one of the most diverse cities in the world, where you're going to run up across different languages, different types of people, different skin shades, different cultures. And I think it's also important for individuals to have a diverse group around them as friends. And so, so one of the things I feel like is necessary for me in terms of racial reconciliation is to call out my white friends or Asian friends when they say something that's not really appropriate about black people. And I, as early as last week, done something like that. So, and then also on the other side of that, where I have friends who will call me out for it. I have friends call me out for saying things about a certain groups of people that I had no idea that I was saying. And so, I think that's why it's important to keep that group around you to hold you accountable.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such, I don't know, it's obviously can be an uncomfortable experience, but it's such a privilege to have that, an honor to have those types of people around you who care about you enough and care about themselves enough to say, hey, wait a minute, that's actually not okay. And let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you how that sounds to me. Is like, it's a very humbling experience, but a very, very necessary one, I think. So you talked a lot about identity and figuring out your identity and how you claimed all of these different identities. Do you feel like there was a moment where you were able to kind of step into a truer identity?
Yeah. Well, it didn't happen until I went to college. And it's sort of, I was in this identity search zone, leaving high school, and sort of I felt like college was my time to sort of reinvent myself altogether, right? I'm away from not only my family, but I'm away from the friends I had made, and even the relationships with women that I had sort of fostered that were from different schools, fostered in this small community. So, college going 3 hours away, still remaining in the same state of Arkansas. I wanted to be something.
Yeah.
And so I spent my first couple of years just partying, trying to meet a bunch of different people and trying to figure out what that would look like. What would Shawn be? And yeah, I always summarize it by it was grades and girls for me, and sort of building my identity on my ability to make good grades.
Yeah.
And some of the same stuff still carried over into college, where people who also come from small towns in Arkansas are bringing that same mentality to college as well. And so there's this oftentimes they pick on you for certain things, that the same things you were getting picked on in high school.
Yeah.
And then for 2 years I sort of buried my head in the books, and then also buried my head in just partying. And it wasn't until my sophomore year where there was this dude who kept bothering me. That's really how I describe it. He just kept bothering me.
Yeah.
He always wanted to hang out, and I was like, "Why you want to hang out with me?" It was just this white dude.
Yeah.
And being that I was used to hanging out with white people and being around white people, which I can't say the same for a lot of my black friends in college. They were used to coming from areas where it was predominantly black, and they were going to a school which was 30% black.
Yeah.
And they were hanging out in their small groups with their black friends. For me, it was, I played rugby, which is either South African or white. So, and so he was on a rugby team, and he always wanted to hang out. And when we got together, he would whip out his Bible and start going through like scripture. And he would remind me of who Jesus was. And then after he reminded me who Jesus was, he reminded me who I was created to be. And he used scripture to do that. And then after that, like we were just, hanging out, and he would chase me so much. Like he would call me and I wouldn't answer the phone. I would say, this dude wants to hang out and like read the Bible and stuff. And people just assumed that, I was a Christian because my dad was a pastor. My mom's in the choir, and I had gone through the motions in growing up as a child, and baptized when I was 9. I knew what to say. I knew the right words. I knew the right scriptures. I had those memorized. But I if I looking back now, I wouldn't say I was a Christian then. It was more of a sort of leaning on the faith of my parents and watching them and hoping that their faith was strong enough to bring me into heaven one day.
Right.
And in that moment, this guy sort of held a mirror in front of me, using God's word to really show who I was and who I was created to be, and where my faults were, and how I would never be able to live up to that. And then a couple weeks later, after he was having a Bible study with me, my mom had passed away. And so for me, knowing that my faith was heavily rooted in who my parents were, especially my mom. I was a mama's boy. And knowing that was just taken away from me, it's like, well, now where is my faith at?
Yeah.
Like where am I? Like what is going on with my life? And it was great that this guy, when I was sort of struggling to figure out what my identity was, he was there. And so he was just ready and available to sort of use God's word to teach me the gospel and what that meant. And so I ended up actually moving in with this guy in the summer after my sophomore year. And that's where I got to meet other people who had already realized their identity in Christ. And so I got to see that unfold and just watch as their lives sort of reflected what they were founded in and what they believed in, what they thought was true. And so that was great for me. And then even inside of that, like in his house, he had a roommate who was black. And he looked like me.
Yeah.
He talked like me. Yeah. And he also came from the same type of environment as me. And for me, that was the first time I had ever seen someone who they had this identity. They weren't trying to be something that they were not. They were just okay with people saying whatever they wanted to say about them.
Yeah.
But they knew that their identity was kept in Jesus Christ. And for me, that was great to see because, yeah, like I've seen, Christian white people. I had seen that.
Yeah.
And that was something familiar to me growing up in a town where they're everywhere.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I had noticed that some dude was my same age and looked like me and sort of acted like me. And it was destined that we became friends. We're still friends to this day. And for me, it was great to also have him sort of disciple me and allow me to sort of figure out what was it like to be a Christian? What was it like to follow Christ? What did it mean to actually pray? What did it mean to read the Bible? And that's where God began to instill this new identity within me. So yeah.
That's really cool that you had those two specific relationships. The one guy who was just relentlessly like talking to you about Jesus.
He was a bugaboo. Real talk.
Yeah, like it's just relentlessly pursuing you. You were calling yourself a Christian at that time?
Yeah.
I don't feel like that's necessarily a common experience for people. I mean, for me, I think in college was a time where my faith started to develop in a different way as well, where it was more personal. It was more like, okay, I'm separated from the environment I grew up in. What do I actually believe as an individual? And so I think it's really powerful that you had that example, that you had that kind of pursuit. That's a very much a model of, or a representation, I guess, of how Christ pursues us, how God pursues us, no matter where we are, whether we're calling ourselves a Christian or not, how he's still like continually coming after us. That's a really cool experience that you got to have with that relationship.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience that a lot of people always question because they're like, you just lost your mother, right? It would have been okay. It would have been okay if you wanted to go cry in a corner and never come out, right? If you wanted to go lock yourself in a room. But for me, I always describe it as I never experienced the overwhelming peace after that situation. I never experienced anything like that in my life where it felt like everything was fine. And I think a part of it was like, ever since then, God has surrounded me with community. And I think a lot of times, like we want to we go through something difficult, we go through something that's hard, and we want to just be by ourselves.
Yeah.
But we weren't created like that. And a part of it was understanding that identity that I was meant to be around people. As iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. So it's like I was created to be with other people, created to be with brothers and sisters and to do life together. And so I think it would have been a lot more difficult if I didn't have this guy chasing after me. And I felt like God was setting me up for what was to come by surrounding me with this community so that when things around me were just crumbling and things didn't make sense and things were falling apart, that this community would be there to lift me up. They would be there to catch me. So I'm definitely grateful for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really powerful to have a community that you feel like you can be with in grief and in struggle and be honest about that. Because I think the tendency for me at least, is to come to church or come to community and maybe put on a face of like, no, everything's great. Everything's fine because I have Jesus. Right. Like just feel like I always have to be happy. Like I always have to have like, everything's fine. Everything's great. And, not everything is great always. It's just a fact of life. So like being able to have a community where you can dive into those things together is, like you said, it's what we were made for, right? We're not made for a community that is presupposes that everything is fine, because it's not. Like we're guaranteed that in this world we will have trouble. But to have the community that's with you in that and can also remind you of the hope that we have in Christ is such a gift. Right.
And it's the vulnerability that one is us being comfortable with the person to be vulnerable with them, and then also them being comfortable with receiving that vulnerability.
Yeah.
And because I think you can have community and you can have people that you can talk to and be yourself around. But there's a difference. There's like this extra notch where I know that whatever I say to you, you will accept it as what it is.
Yeah.
You won't necessarily, you might not even have the right words to say, but I know that you're listening and I know that you're praying for me. I know that you care for me. And so I'm willing to reveal these things about you and vice versa, right? They're willing to reveal certain things about them and we would just carry each other's burdens. So yeah, having that group of guys there was definitely important. And even to this day where I still have people in my life that are okay with me not being okay.
Yeah.
And that has been helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it can be very uncomfortable to just sit with a person, sit in their, take on their burdens, to weep when they weep, and to rejoice when they rejoice. But to like that part of it, because it can be uncomfortable. And I've found that there's a tendency to maybe put a blanket over it, if you can think of it metaphorically that way, where it's like, I've this secondhand like sadness. I don't like feeling that. And so I'm just going to say something like a cliche or like try to fix it somehow.
Right.
But that's not actually what you need in those times.
Right.
It's what you said, like someone who's just going to be there with you and not like have all the right answers or give you some sort of like sermon or judge you for not being okay. It's just someone who's going to be there with you. Yeah.
And there's actually, when my mom passed away, I remember calling one of my friends. This is different from the other two guys, but another guy that had been in my life that I met in college. And so he actually came to faith through sort of our relationship and the relationship of our other friend. And this is the beauty of community, where you can have people within your community that just see, they're non-believers, but they just see your community at work. They see how engaged you are with one another.
Yeah.
And then the gospel just speaks to them. And then they whether like you just plant a seed or you're like intentionally chasing after them, they just see that at work. And I think God uses that for them to even come into the kingdom. But I remember like leaving the hospital and then calling one of my friends who had lived in California and just sobbing. I remember talking to him what had just happened, and he just listened. And I think, and just to go what you're talking about, they're just listening, available to hear you, to hear you out. He didn't say a word, and that is a moment that I'll always remember. And it's sort of, I think, it's a great picture of community. It's a great picture of the kingdom that God is even fostering here on earth, that we will eventually be able to worship Him for eternity in heaven. But I think about that being just an illustration of what it means to walk this life together. So that's my take on that. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing everything that you shared. Before we sign off, will you tell me one thing that's hard right now and one thing that's great? There's one thing that's great, and I think it's what we just talked about this entire episode. This is a community that I've been, coming from Arkansas, New Jersey, spending a lot of time in different cities in New Jersey. Also, you should take a tour of New Jersey. Okay. Yeah. Just do that. Just go to different towns. Just go to different. Every town I have is a been different. To New Jersey before. Oh, you've been once? A couple of times. I've been to the shore. Okay, that's not and I have a friend who grew up in Flanders, which is near Morristown. Okay. Yeah. So I've been to that area before as well for her wedding. Got it. Yeah. So I used to live in Morristown, but I've been to many different cities in New Jersey, and everywhere I've gone, God has surrounded me with a group of people, a community. So that's a great thing. Yeah. I think one of the hard thing is to be in a city like New York City. Everyone is grabbing at your coattails, and whether they realize it or not, I feel like there's always this pressure to be something, to do something. Yeah. And to make a certain amount of money or to be this amount of success, to go for it all and to go after your dreams, but at the same time have a lot of money in your bank account, right? And I feel like for me that pressure weighs heavy on me. And it is really a pressure that I'm applying myself and allowing the world to sort of dictate how much pressure that is.
Yeah.
But I think that also goes back to having a community to remind you of where your identity is. But there always is that temptation to seek more, to do more. And it has nothing to do with building the kingdom of God. So it's always this like battle that is waging war between me. So, but yeah, that's the good and bad of me today.
Of right now.
Right now.
Well, Shawn, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Thanks again to Shawn for sitting down with me. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson and sound editing is by Andrew Kim. Check back next week as I wrap up season 2 with a reflection on relationships and share some tips for building deeper relationships. If you have any thoughts or want to engage on this topic further, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Or you can go to my website, marybsafrit.com. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get an email from me every other Wednesday with an exclusive message and direct access to content and resources I think you'll love. You can also shoot me a message by clicking on Contact Me. And you can always head over to Instagram and follow me at maryb.safrit. That's all for now. Check back next week for a brand new episode.